welcome back to the Peace of Living podcast. We are your hosts, Jason
and Allison.
And we have a very special guest with us tonight. This is our dear friend and good neighbor and fellow ward member, Kyle Hayes. And Allie and I love Kyle Hayes. We've known him for a long time. And Kyle, as you'll hear, is just a natural storyteller, and he has a very strong testimony of Jesus Christ. And every time he gets up to give a talk or bear his testimony or give a lesson, my heart's been touched. I don't know about you, Allie, but...
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Well, we've been kind of shooting the breeze with Kyle in our living room here before we started. We should have just recorded. He told us some pretty cool stories already, but we're not going to share those on the podcast this time.
Not all of them.
Not all of them. But we were saying that, yeah, like Kyle's the type of person that, yeah, you know, when he gets up to speak, it's going to be good just because you have such a goodness about you that is so evident. And it's just, I can't wait for you to talk about what you do for a living because, oh man, this is something that really plays to your natural strengths. So, but I'm not going to steal your thunder. I'm going to let you say that for yourself.
Yeah, so Kyle, could just tell us a little bit more about yourself. Tell the listeners like what you do, because it is very cool what you do. You know, kind of your family. Just a brief kind of intro. Who is Kyle Hayes?
Okay, well, like you said, I'll start with work because I'm a nurse.
Yeah,
and it's sort of interesting. When I was a young person. I was actually sort of not very good at school. And anyway, as I got a little older, obviously I wanted to go on a mission and I wanted, you know, to get my patriarchal blessing. And anyway, part of that patriarchal blessing said that after my mission, I'd be able to choose a field of learning and choose a vocation that would I find joy in and provide well for my family and everything. And I thought, boy, that would be a great blessing to have. And so I did serve the mission and I came back and I thought I was going to be a biologist.
Cool. Yeah.
Which is okay. I like science and everything. And anyway, I was up at Utah State. And anyway, in a way, that was sort of amazing because when I was younger, I was in resource classes, you know, and you know, I think probably to a lot of people, teachers and so forth, to say you'll go on to college, you know, they would probably shake their heads and say,
yeah,
you know, I don't know if you could cut that, you know, type of thing. So I really appreciated that from my patriarchal blessing said, you know, you'll go on to get an education and choose a field of learning. So anyway, and I thought, the mission helped me too in that aspect because I was learning and growing and, you know, being guided by the hand of the Lord, so to speak, to set myself up type of thing. And anyway, while I was up there, sure enough, some things unfolded that biology just didn't seem to fit. But I took a class that sort of matches your interests type of thing. And one thing that came up was medical. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds about right. That sounds really good. So I switched over to nursing and worked hard, took the classes that I needed to. And I applied for the College of Nursing up there that went through Weber State, actually. And anyway, as many others got turned down. And they said, oh, there's like, 40, 45 positions open and 500 people applied.
Wow.
So I'm like, Yeah, me with my B minus average
Yeah,
is
sure.
not going to do that. So anyway, the instructor there or counselor said, if you really want to do this, you got to apply everywhere, increase your odds of getting in. So I'm like, okay, that sounds good. And so one thing I thought, well, I'll move back home. That way I don't have to pay rent. Good idea out there, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Especially right now, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
And anyway, so I do that and I apply at BYU, Weber State, University of Utah, Salt Lake Community College. I'm just getting out there.
Yeah.
So anyway, and of course I get turned down, a lot. And the only one that, sort of said, oh, we'll take you is Salt Lake Community College. And I'm like, okay, great.
Yeah.
And then they said, yeah, we'll put you on the waiting list. It'll be 2 years. So I'm like,
2 years.
2 years. And I'm like, I could be trying to improve my standing and get in at other places while I'm waiting this 2 years type of thing. So anyway, at the time I went up to the University of Utah and I was taking their prerequisites. And it was really funny because a lot of the classes that I had taken up at Utah State just didn't transfer over to the U.
Oh, man.
So it was sort of interesting stuff like, chemistry and the biology and nutrition. And they're like, oh, no, you're going to have to take all these over again. So I'm like, okay, I'll do whatever I need to do.
Yeah.
And so one of the things was like chemistry, right?
Mm.
And I said, well, I did take a chemistry class. And they said, oh, no, you've got to take a 3-course thing of chemistry. And that won't count as any of them. So I'm like, okay. So I take the whole thing, organic, inorganic, biochem.
Wow.
Take them all.
Yeah.
And, I pass the classes with like C's and stuff. And they said,
You passed.
but that's the problem.
Oh, no.
When you're there, they said, you got to have A's and B's.
Oh, wow.
You can't have any of these C's, So I retook the entire course again of chemistry. So by the end, I had 7 courses of chemistry.
All right. That's awesome.
That's part of it, though, is having the gumption to say, I tried and failed, but I'm going to try again.
Yeah.
Redo this. And that's the way a lot of my college career went, type of thing. But let me tell you, by 7 courses of chemistry, I knew my chemistry.
I bet you did. Yeah. No kidding.
And lo and behold, the 3rd time I applied for University of Utah College of Nursing, I'd been used to getting back these little envelopes saying, we had many qualified applicants.
Yeah, right.
But the 3rd time came back this big manila envelope, and I don't know if I've ever been more excited in my life to get mail. I knew that was it. And in the way I knew that it was the hand of the Lord, guiding me if I would just put in the time and the effort, because I knew in the patriarchal blessing that I would be guided to that career in which I'd find joy and happiness and provide for my family. And I think that willingness to stick to things pays off, in the end. And I got through the College of Nursing. I got into nursing. I love helping other people out. And like I told you earlier, I think it's great because you get to serve people and you get paid for it at the same time. So
yeah,
in that way, it really has been a great blessing, to not only to me and my family and so forth. So
That's wonderful.
You said something that really touched me when we were talking before we recorded, because you work in the Department of Oncology, right? At Intermountain Medical Center.
Yes.
Which is like the premier hospital here in Utah. And so if you have any family or friends or anyone that's got cancer and they're at IMC, just know they are in really, really good hands. But I loved what you said earlier, because from my perspective, I'm the type of person, I'm very sensitive. I have a tendency to like absorb the feelings that are around me.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily a good thing, but like I've always thought if I had to work like in a cancer unit, that it would weigh down on me. And I asked you about that and you said it has the opposite effect. So could you just briefly share why you said that? Because I loved what you said about working with cancer patients.
I've worked now coming up on 25 years in the cancer area type of thing. And I spent close to 20 years doing bone marrow transplants with patients who had like leukemia, which is very serious, obviously, and some of the others. And it's sort of interesting because their life has been turned upside down type of thing. They come in with the deer in headlights look about them. And I don't know, I think there's something calming if you can bring them down off that state of mind of like, my world is turned upside down and what's happening and I don't know what's going on, and being that reassurance type of thing is, we're going to take care of you. We're going to have the best medical team available there to find out what's going on, and we're going to take you by the hand and guide you through this. And you've really got to, I'd say, dumb things down as a nurse, because the doctors come in and they're talking in doctor language, and they're in that state of mind to begin with of like, what's happening? I can't grasp anything. And you're talking about thrombocytopenia and neutropenia and, all this sort of stuff. And I'm like, no, what the people need is, listen, these cancer cells, they're just growing without control. And we need to give you something that's going to fight this. And what it is I tell them chemotherapy, it's designed just to kill fast-growing cells, but it doesn't know good cells from bad cells. And so it's just going to kill all good cells. And I tell them, like, well, let's think of what good growing cells you have that are going to be affected by this. And I'm like, does your hair grow fast? Oh, yeah, every week or every month I go in for my haircut and everything, and go, okay, so that chemotherapy is just going to kill that fast-growing cell. And that's why cancer patients lose their hair. And they're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, because I've seen patients with bald heads and so forth. And then, I tell them, guide them through all that sort of thing and make it more understandable, more friendly and everything. And then they're like going from way up here with anxiety and everything, and it brings them down, and they're like, okay, yeah, I can handle this, and we're going to work on that. So, yes, it gives me a lot of pleasure seeing someone take that step, from panic to, okay, this is going to be okay, and I'm going to be there for you, and the doctors are going to be there for you. And then once you've built that trust, then you're ready to take that next step. And so in that way, I found it, back to your original question of, being gloom and doom, is you're picking them up and making them feel better about themselves. And hopefully with a little more humor and stuff to break the ice, you're going to build that relationship of trust. And that's what you need when you're going through tough times like cancer.
Now, just listening to you talk, I'm assuming that when you were going through those 7 courses of chemistry, yes. you probably at that time had no idea the kind of impact or what it would be like to be helping cancer patients. All you had was the chemistry class in front of you at the time, right?
Yeah, well, it's sort of interesting. The one thing that I really learned from that chemistry course is that basically we're all chemical factories. Sort of weird to think that your body's a chemical factory, right. But it is. There's so many chemical reactions going on within the human body. It's amazing. Because if you think about it, I'm bringing in oxygen, but then that oxygen is going into your lungs where it's taking in that oxygen and exchanging it with CO2, You breathe that out and that's there. Your red blood cells are there in your lungs picking up the new oxygen, bring it around to the cells and everything like that. And how, just little things like breathing is a chemical thing. And you're eating food, nutrition.
Right. Same
thing. And a lot of times when we're giving medications, and chemotherapy is one of them, people want to know, how is this going to affect me? Well, the thing is you're a different chemical factory than your wife.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And so I'd like to say it's going to be exactly like this, but it's not.
Sure.
Because we're all individuals and we all are processing things different ways. So, to tell you the truth, that's the biggest thing I've learned from chemistry, even though, we knew a lot of other things about chemistry book-wise. But, because patients and people, they want to say, how is this going to affect me? And that's why, a lot of times, like people look at side effects of medications and they're like, I'm going to get all of these side effects. And I'm like, no, they got to list everything that everybody's going to have, but it's not going to be you personally.
Yeah.
And I guess in a way too, I always like to bring things back to gospel topics and so forth. I think people want to know what's going to happen in my life and what's the plan and everything. And, the Lord's interested in you personally. Yeah. And it's going to happen to you differently than it happens to anyone else. And no one knows that better than, our Savior.
You guys.
I was just going to say, and and you're right on. And like your story is such an example of faith in Jesus Christ, because you had no idea the impact that you'd be having right now in your career working with cancer patients when you were going through those classes. And yet, like, you felt like, look, my patriarchal blessing, I feel like it's pointing me here. The Spirit's kind of pointing me here. I'm going to keep pressing forward, where many might be like, look, I didn't get in, I'm out, but where you pressed forward, it's now like paying off years later. I'm sure you've had a great career this whole time, but like, it's so evident that like Allie and I, we know Kyle, we can see him and see his face right now. But like, it's so evident that he truly does find joy. His patriarchal blessing's been fulfilled. And Kyle, we have a lot of younger people listening to this podcast, my institute students, seminary students. And a lot of them are trying to figure out their path in life. And I'm hoping that they're picking up the gospel principles that you're kind of putting down here with, following your patriarchal blessing, following the Spirit. And like, sure, for some of us, like you just mentioned, even with chemistry, like each of us has a different path. For me, like maybe I go down a path and I get turned down, and it's like, I definitely feel like, okay, that was the wrong road. I'm going to turn around. But sometimes it's not the wrong road. Sometimes it means I just need to keep trying at this thing, keep working even harder, because those blessings are going to be fulfilled, and they are. I can testify to you that for Kyle, like he's living a joyful life in circumstances at work where many, like Allie and I, might assume like, ooh, cancer, it's got to be hard. Doesn't that get you down? But Kyle's one of the happiest guys that I know. So if you're listening to this, and especially if you're younger, trying to find your path, like this is a great example. We've given you some of our experience getting into seminary and our career paths, in previous podcast episodes. And it's going to be different for everybody. So we hope that this message from Kyle so far has been beneficial to those that are looking to find their way.
Yeah, that's a really great takeaway. I was going to go somewhere totally different.
Oh, yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Because this sort of ties into what we were planning on speaking about based off of a talk that you gave recently that was really good. But you mentioning how each individual is basically their own chemical factory, and that, like I'm going to react to things differently than my husband will, and everybody is different. Like that kind of just opened my mind a little bit more to just the immensity of Jesus Christ's atonement.
Sure.
Because we always, we learn from the Book of Mormon, Alma 7, that Jesus, he suffered all these pains and afflictions so that he would know how to succor us as individuals. And what I love about that is like, there really is nothing general about it. It's very specific. It's very individual, because sometimes like when I get sick or whatever, I was just talking about this with Jason today. 'Cause like Jason gets a headache and he's still like up and going, and it hurts. Obviously it doesn't feel really great, but rarely does he get a headache that like levels him. And I feel like I'm on the opposite end of that, where like I've had headaches most of my life, but when I get a lot of really bad ones where like I can't do anything but just lie down, like I'm useless. And I hate that, because like I want to keep going. I want to keep pushing through, but like my body just won't let me. Like it makes it worse. And it's really frustrating, because I'm like, why can't I be like Jason? Why can't I just like shake this off? Like, am I weaker? Like, do I not have as high of a pain tolerance? You start to say all these things and get to these conclusions about yourself, when in reality, we can't compare ourselves we really can't compare anyone else to ourselves on a cellular level. We cannot. And when we say something like Jesus Christ understands me personally, like that's a very literal thing. Like I just love combining truth from like the scientific world with things on a spiritual nature, that I'm like, that rang so true with me when you said that we were all that different, that I'm like, so the way that Jesus is going to succor me is different from how he would for Jason. And I don't know, that just really, really touched me.
Yeah, not to make the whole episode about like your professional life and what you've learned. No,
it's so symbolic.
But exactly, and that's exactly where I want to go. Is I want to ask you, like overtly, Kyle, like in your profession, you've obviously had decades of experience. Not too many, right? But a couple decades here.
50 decades.
50 down. No. You've had a lot of great experience, and you've seen a lot. You've experienced a lot. You know a lot. How has your professional life, especially working in the field you do with cancer patients, strengthened and expanded your faith in Jesus Christ and his restored gospel?
Yeah, that's a really good topic. And I've got an example. This one evening, they brought in this patient who was having fevers, and they wanted to do what they call blood cultures, or draw some blood from what we call a central line. It was called a PIC line. And anyway, so I'm like, okay, I can do that. I've done that many times. And so I prepare all the things that I need for this blood draw. And anyway, I draw the blood and then got informed from the doctor, we want to pull that PICC line. And I'm like thinking to myself, I don't know, I've had a lot of experience with this. This seems like a really soft call because the temperature wasn't all that high. And, some of the other signs and symptoms that I'm used to seeing with a central line infection aren't there, So I'm like, I called the doctor back. Said, I'm sure this might not be the best case. You don't want to tread too much on doctors.
Do you know what you're talking about, doctor?
Exactly. But anyway, the doctor says, well, I just want to side on the case of, being a little safe. And I'm like, okay, I mean, you're the doctor. I just wanted to do my job at voicing my concern and everything. So the doctor said, yeah, let's do that. So I'm like, okay, I'll do that. And anyway, I've pulled out many PICC lines before. I've done it hundreds of times. And anyway, I told the patient, this is what we're going to do, and we're going to pull this out. And anyway, I take this securement device off it and I start pulling the line, and it's probably about, somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 centimeters, which is, 24 inches or something like that. And so I'm starting to pull this out. And anyway, I get to a certain point and it stops, which is really unusual. Most of the time it just comes right out and send them on their way. So anyway, I'm like, this is unusual. And usually you don't like saying that to patients because then they start panicking. What's wrong with me, type of thing. And anyway, so...
something is not right.
Something's not right with you. They don't like hearing that. And
you say oops.
Oh, shoot.
So luckily, there was another nurse who was on the PICC team for years and years, and she had good experience with PICC lines. She put PICC lines in, So I sort of asked her, this is happening, and I've never had this happen before. Anyway, she says, what happens sometimes is they have vasoconstriction, and which means the vein is grabbing hold of it and just holding in tight. And she said, well, why don't you do this? Why don't you put heat on that arm and see, and give it some time, see if that relaxes those muscles around the vein so you can pull out the PICC line. I'm like, okay, sounds good. So anyway, I do that, and at the time it was towards the end of the shift, so I didn't have any other patients, and so I start talking to the patient and get to know her a little bit better, just passing time. And anyway, she tells me that this cancer that she has is really rare type of cancer, and that the prognosis for it isn't good, and I'm like, oh, okay, and tell me more about your family. And she says, we got 4 kids and all this sort of stuff. And she told me how she met her husband and all this. And I'm like, wow, that's amazing, And she told me that she's hoping to get maybe 2 years left with her family, a young family I don't know the ages, but she had some teenagers, and the youngest was probably 7 or 8. And anyway, she's telling me about her husband, and just a few years back, he was in a snowmobiling accident and was left a paraplegic, And I am just, my heart is going out to her, as we're sitting there and we're talking about this, and we have this complication with her line, and it really hit me hard, that's part of being a nurse. You're trying to separate yourself from the job a little bit because, like you were saying, that Allison, that you could find that to be hard, and usually I do a pretty good job. I got to concentrate on the tasks at hand, but this time, it was really hitting me, because I was really starting to get to know her better. And anyway, we couldn't get that PICC line out that night, and I was a little worried. And the other nurse, who was a PICC line nurse, who was a little more experienced at that, sometimes she says what we do is we send them home and they're able to relax more and come back tomorrow, and we'll see if we can get it out then. So anyway, I did, and she came back the next day, and, she's LDS as well, and so I'm sure we're both praying, that this is going to work out and things are going to be okay. So anyway, luckily that PICC line came out really slick the next day. Wow. So I was happy about that. But part of the thing that I was studying at the time was in the New Testament, it said that Jesus had healing in his wings. And that really struck me. And I'm like, I'd love to have healing in my wings. I guess that's why I like to become a nurse. And I'm like, related back to Alma, where he said, I'd love to be an angel and flying in the midst of heaven with the everlasting gospel. And that would be his thing. And I'm like, but Alma says, I do err in that thought, but that's what I would like. And I felt the same thing is the thing, if I had the desire in my heart, I wish I had healing in my wings like Jesus had healing in his wings, and to be able to help out specifically this patient. But we're all become patients at one point in time, but that's sort of how it helps me.
Wow. Well, and I would say, Kyle, I think that in more ways than one, I think that you have been given that gift, healing in your wings. I mean, just hearing when you speak and your stories and just your gentle and kind nature, I think has had a healing effect on us, and I'm sure on everybody that comes in contact with you. It's really cool how that's your desire, but it's also, it leads in perfectly with your natural inclinations and natural personality. And I do think that God has definitely given you that gift in more ways than one, not just even outside of your nursing. So that's awesome. Thank you, Kyle.
Welcome.
Maybe switching gears a little bit, and we've heard, some great stories from your youth and young adult years, but, since there are especially so many young people listening to this, maybe think back to how, your faith in Jesus Christ and his gospel and your testimony started to grow. Are there any experiences from when you were growing up or, in your growing up years that stand out in your memory as this was a moment for me where I felt my heart just expand with the love and faith in Jesus Christ?
Yeah, I'd been thinking about that question, and I point back actually to my parents. I love my parents. They've been great examples for me. I remember growing up that my mom loved going out and visiting widows in the ward. And she loved those people. And, I can see why, widows, they have a need. And my mom was so good about going and visiting them and picking them up and lift them, in their time of need. And I always remembered, whenever we had our Sunday dinner, it's your normal pot roast and gravy and mashed potatoes, so forth. There was always an extra plate, and Mom would always take that plate and wrap it in cellophane and go see her widows and give them, a nice Sunday dinner as well. And one experience I remember so well is this one time, the people who lived behind us had kids about our same age as us. And I remember being excited because my parents had bought us new bicycles, all my brothers and sisters. And anyway, we were so happy about that. And then all of a sudden they're gone. And we're like, what is going on? And it just so happened to be that our next door neighbor kids had taken our bikes. And anyway, your natural tendency is, I hate that.
Yeah, right.
These are, our bikes and you're stealing them.
Right.
And anyway, so we called the police. We got our bikes back, everything like that. And then something that was really peculiar. My parents went out and bought them bikes. And I'm like, what are you doing?
Wow.
You're buying our enemies a bike, And anyway, I'm trying to process this as a little kid. I'm like,
how old were you? 8, 10?
Somewhere around that age, 10, somewhere in there. And, that's really when, you've always heard do unto others as you would have do unto you. And, in my mind, I'm like, that's totally unnatural, but my parents are showing love and compassion to my enemy, but isn't that what Jesus said? Love your enemies, pray for them who despitefully use you and abuse you and so forth. And the thing is I think when we do that, the people who have offended us take a step back too.
Yeah.
And they say, why are you being nice to me?
Yeah.
And it's interesting because of their example before me, it really hit home and made me stop and think and really analyze, the stuff that Jesus says, even though it doesn't feel natural to you,
right,
was the best thing. And we never had those kids stealing our bikes again.
Yeah.
Because they had their
solved
own.
that problem.
And actually, it's funny because I told the story back to my parents. So they said, yeah, we did that so that they wouldn't steal your bikes again. But to me, it was more of the principle that was taught by Jesus. And that's sort of the thing. And I really like using that, especially with your spouse and loved one, type of thing. A lot of times when you're fighting with your spouse, which you never should, but we do, right? The funny thing is always that defense mechanism comes up, and you're always wrong and I'm always right, vice versa. So I found that if you can do something that helps lower those defensive mechanisms, that's when you can build common ground. One thing is if you can sit in the middle of a fight, and I know this is hard to do because you're thinking they're wrong and I'm right and everything. If you can sit there, and even though they say 10 things that you don't agree with, if you can only find one that you sort of agree with, and you say, you're right, honey, about that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then they're like, oh, you're agreeing with me. And their defenses come down,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. And
then it's more of an opportunity to say, I'm sorry about that. And, and it's easier to mend fences and to get things back. But I don't know if that answered your question.
That's wonderful. Yeah.
Anyway, those are my experiences.
I think that's especially beautiful. Like, I got a little teary hearing that story about your parents and just buying the bike. I don't think I'll ever forget that.
It was stuck right there.
Yeah. And it made me think, like, what are my kids observing from me? I don't know. Don't ask me today.
Well, they're not perfect.
It was not the best day.
Sometimes we get things right.
Yeah, sometimes we get things right. That's perfect. So kind of looking more, as you've grown into adulthood and had your family and everything, is there, have there been any experiences, like what has caused you to trust in God? What experiences have caused you to trust the most in God? What's kind of nurtured your testimony along the way?
That's a good question. Trust is a great thing.
Yeah.
I talked about building trust with patients, building trust with others. That's one thing they taught us, on a mission, building relationships of trust, right? And that's how you really connect with people. And anyway, you also have to build that trust with your Father in heaven. And I think that's really important. I remember in Alma, there's a formula that Alma comes up with. And if you read it and you come away with it, it works every time, type of thing. And part of my background, I like science. I like formulas, 2 + 2 always equals 4. It's consistent. Alma had this to say. He said that if you have trust in the Lord with your trials, he will always bring you to your deliverance. Okay, an example of that was Alma the Younger. When he taught people when he ran away from King Noah, and they were gathering together and he was teaching them. And anyway, as you know in the story, a group of Lamanites find them out there and they basically capture them.
Yeah.
And specifically, there was one of the other high priests of King Noah that knew Alma, that was with the Lamanites, and lo and behold, he set over Alma and his people. And you know what a trial that was for Alma and his people. And anyway, what did the people learn to do? They learned to trust in the Lord because, trying to remember the name of that other high priest who was in charge. But anyway, he said, you can't pray.
Yeah.
You can't pray. But Alma told them to have prayer in their hearts, made their burdens lighter. They overcame that trial, to that, because they trusted in the Lord. Well, lo and behold, the time came where Alma, was inquiring the Lord how to get away, basically. And the Lord said, I'll have a deep sleep to come upon the Lamanites and you'll be able to escape. Well, anyway, guess what happens? Deep sleep comes on. They're able to move out their entire population and be able to escape the Lamanites. Now, Alma said this, once again, the formula was trust in the Lord will equal deliverance, or the deliverance of your trial. Problem is, we don't know time period when that's going to happen, but you have to have that faith in that formula, which is trust in the Lord. And it's sort of interesting because in the book of Alma, you saw it again, when I think it's Alma, not senior, but junior, they were in jail. They trusted the Lord.
Love that story.
Eventually, they were delivered. So anyway, you plug that in. You were captured, you trusted in the Lord, you were delivered. Once again, in the jail, you were captured, you trusted in the Lord, you were delivered.
Yeah.
Big thing here. Because of those trials that are in our lives, every time we use that formula and it works out the same, our trust, our faith is increased.
Yeah.
Right? And Alma says, and in the end, the very biggest one is death, sin, right?
Yeah.
Because you have trusted in these smaller formulas, guess what? I delivered you. I will deliver you from death, the biggest one, that and sin. But since you've used that formula, you trust that formula, it'll happen again and again and again. And there's your answer, This is how we build trust, and that's the way it should be. And for those listeners out there, try the formula, right? I think of the way of, like Malachi when he was talking about tithing, prove you herewith if I won't send down the blessings of heaven. Same thing here. Prove me now herewith with your trial and trusting me if I will not deliver you. And that's a huge lesson that I learned.
So not to put you on the spot.
Sure.
But I'm very curious, based from what you just said, how can you think of some times, or you can be as detailed as you want, but how have you seen that formula work in your life where you've trusted in him and you've been delivered? Anything in particular come to mind?
Well, we already went over my schooling, and I felt
absolutely, it's huge.
People are wondering if I can make it to college. I remember back in high school, I had never been in a regular English class, right?
Right.
Because I was always in resource class, right? And my senior year, my mom was a great advocate for me. And she went to the principal and said, hey, can we move him up to a regular English class? And I thought, because English was my worst subject. type of thing. My little 10-year-olds say in primary, you misspelled that word, and I'm like, you're right. English is not it. So I'm like, well, if I'm going to go to college, I got to see if I can even pass a regular English class, and anyway, they agreed with my mom, let's just try it, see how he does, So I was put in a regular English class. I worked through it, and at the end I got like a B, But I remember this. I remember the teacher telling me this. Well, your work really isn't B quality work. They said, thing is it's senior, and seniors are not turning in their homework and stuff like that. But you did everything that was required. And because you did all this, guess what? You got to be, because everybody else was doing poorly.
That's great.
But once again, it was that stick-to-itiveness, do everything you can.
Yeah.
And you're going to be blessed, even though my work wasn't quality work, I was giving it my all.
Yeah, sure.
And I sort of think that was the same thing about, college. When I went up there, I had to take 7 courses of chemistry, but I kept at it. And guess what? I did it, and we got
You were delivered.
through. And I was delivered. So therefore, that was the formula, and it worked.
It's cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool. Thanks, Kyle.
Oh, I just love that, because I'm picturing, like, in my mind, when you cross to the other side and you have that inevitable face-to-face with the Lord and accounting of your life, he's not going to care that you didn't get the top marks in all your classes. No. Not at all. No. But he's going to look at your persistence and how you just kept at it, and how that ultimately, like we've said here, led you to where you needed to be in a position where you could truly make a difference in people's lives. I'm just blown away. Like, your life is so cool. I love this story. I love hearing. I hope my kids are listening very carefully to this someday when they care enough about our podcast. But what a great lesson to anybody who's listening, no matter what age you are, really, whether you're young or you're old. Like, you stick to it. It doesn't matter if you're the best, but stick to something. Trust the Lord. He delivers you. Foolproof.
Yeah, I tell student nurses going on, I tell them it doesn't matter what you have to go through, as long as you get to where you want to be, right? So I think that's great with anyone, persistence and so forth, and the Lord helping you, develop you, get you what you need to be. He knows your potential and so forth, and He wants you to succeed. He wants you to be the best that you can be. One of the questions that you had asked earlier before we started recording is, what would be the message you would want to pass along to your posterity?
Yeah, glad you brought that up.
And the answer to me was this: Christ wants to be your guide. Okay, He is there for you. He wants you to succeed. He wants the best for you. I'm a fisherman I wish by trade, but by enjoyment. I love it.
Yeah, that's great.
And the thing about it is, there's been certain times in my life where I've had a guide, a fishing guide, and they show me how to do it, where to do it, thinking about things, going beyond what I've had in the past. And they're expensive, right? But I've noticed every time I've had a guide that I was always better for it than if me trying to fumble through my own way. And the thing about it is, Christ is our guide. you do not have to pay for him. You know, if you could have a free guide at your disposal at any time,
Right.
wouldn't you take it? I mean, yes. The only thing about this type of guide is you do not pay with money, but you pay with being teachable, listening to the Spirit, you know, and that's hard for some people to do. You know, you think you know better. You got to change that. You've got to be to the point of where, yes, you do know what's good for me. And you'll show me the way, even though the way can be tough. You know? But I wish for my posterity and the ones that I love that we can realize that he's willing to be our guide. He's the ultimate guide. He can keep us safe. He can show us the way through college. He can show us the way through work, experience, relationships, anything like that. It's just you have to be close with the Spirit and be teachable, and those things are going to turn out for your benefit.
I love that. And I had a similar experience with a guide just even a couple weeks ago, and I won't go into detail about it now, but I learned many of those same things. It wasn't fishing, but it was off-roading in Sand Hollow.
Sure.
On these slick rocks and boulders and stuff. And it was a little sketchy. It was like, I don't know, a little scary, but I didn't need to be though. And maybe we'll talk more about this in another podcast, but just to emphasize your points, if I followed what the guide said and just trusted in him and put my own, like, oh, I know better, or I've got just trusted in him, I was completely safe the whole time and had a great time doing it. And I couldn't have done that on my own. Yes. And the guide, we don't have to pay for Jesus Christ to be there, except for in the sense of being humble and teachable and saying kind of what Jesus said, like, not my will, but thine be done. Okay, you show me.
Sure.
And he'll get you through. He'll deliver you. Like, he's the deliverer, right? Like you talked about.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I just wanted to add to that too, that like the path does not change. We like to talk about how circumstances don't necessarily change. The Sand Hollow rock experience that you went through, Jason, like, it's not like you having a guide there didn't suddenly get rid of all the boulders, but instead that guide was there to show you how you can navigate them. Mm-hmm. And you still felt the fear and the unsurety maybe because you'd never done that before, but nevertheless, the guide is there, a sure guide that knows what they're doing and can walk you through it, even though the circumstances did not change. They got you through it. So anyway, I thought that was a cool comparison.
Yeah, I loved it too. I mean, there's sometimes, when we were, on those rocks and you're literally like almost at a 45-degree angle, like pointed straight at the sky. You can't see like anything in front of you or really even around you. But all you could see is like the guide's arms, like stretched, outstretched into the sky in front of you, like telling you which way to turn or which way to point. And I just had to completely rely on him. I didn't know if I was going to topple over this huge, like 30-foot boulder or what, but I did. And we got through. And I think, so going back to your message to your, posterity, I think that's an amazing message because it's so true. Like, you could be in the sketchiest, scariest circumstances of your life. You just trust in the guide, like just trust your guide, and you're going to make it. You're going to make it. Like, the only thing that happened to like those Jeeps was, there was no real damage. There was maybe some scrapes on the skid plates, but the skid plates are there for that exact reason, being, scraped on. But beyond that, we made it home, and it was amazing. And same thing with fishing, but just in anything with just the guides, it's powerful. So Kyle, I had maybe one more question. or anything, we can talk about anything else you want to, but I at least had one more thing I wanted to be sure we asked you. Because as I was reading, so I got a copy of Kyle's talk that he gave it was on Easter, right? Easter.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
And he drew a lot of inspiration from Elder McConkey's talk, The Purifying Power of Gethsemane, which if you haven't listened to it, it's a classic talk. You need to go and listen. It's very powerful. Basically Elder McConkey's final testimony, really. And I remember the first time I heard that talk was in the MTC, and it left a big impression on me then. And I listened to it again this morning, and it's still very powerful, especially knowing that he passed away just a few days after this. This was literally his final testimony. And anyway, in your talk, which was kind of a commentary in some ways about that, you brought up the experience of your father-in-law passing away unexpectedly. Was it last year?
Yes.
And you had said that it just hit you like a 2x4. It was like completely unexpected, very difficult experience. But I loved this paragraph that you wrote. You said, we are all to have these experiences and feelings. Jesus was supposed to die, so he could draw all men unto him, that he might be the righteous judge unto all, that he might extend his matchless mercy unto all those who lit him. My arms are extended unto you all the day, and we have to choose to walk into his embrace. And so I wanted to ask you, yes, tying into your father-in-law passing away, but just maybe some of your trials in general. How have you been drawn closer to Jesus Christ and experienced his mercy through those trials that you've experienced?
I think to have a sound understanding of the mercy of Christ is huge, right? I think nothing teaches you more than Scripture of how much he really cares for us and how he wants to extend his mercy to us. I remember specifically earlier in that discussion, that talk, the promise by Moroni, right? Moroni, with the promise of the Book of Mormon, says, I would that you should go back and ponder how merciful the Lord has been from the creation of Adam, even down until the time you receive these things, and ponder them in your heart. We had just gone through last year the Old Testament, right? We saw time and time again how the children of Israel did stupid things, right?
Yes.
Yes, because it's true. You're like,
Yes.
What are you doing?
Right.
You're still worshiping false gods. What are you doing? Time and time again, the Lord showed mercy, even though we as stupid people do stupid things.
Yeah.
Time and time again. So that's one thing that Moroni was doing. Hey, take some time. Go back. Look at how merciful the Lord has been to all the human race, let alone you.
Yeah.
Right? I know me. I know I make mistake after mistake after mistake after mistake. And guess what? For some reason, he still extends his mercy unto me. Right? I thought of the same thing this year when we are looking at the New Testament and he's teaching his apostles. Did they make mistake after mistake after mistake? Didn't I tell you I was going to die? Didn't I tell you I was going to be resurrected? We counted up 5 times the Lord had said, I'm going to die and I'm going to be resurrected, right?
Yeah.
what happens at that time? Because the talk was geared specifically Garden of Gethsemane, the Garden of the Empty Tomb.
Right.
When it happened, I was trying to make the parallel with my father-in-law dying, even though I know all of us are going to be dying, right? But when it happened, I felt like someone hit me in the head with a 2x4. I'm dazed. I'm in unbelief, just the same as those apostles. Those apostles, even though Christ told them, I'm going to die 5 times, he told them. I'm going to be resurrected 5 times, he told them. But when it happened, it's a different story, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, that's the thing, is Christ knows what we are going through and what we're going to go through. And even though he might tell us over and over again, just like he did with the apostles, we need to experience that. And hopefully the thing is just like the apostles, eventually they remembered, oh yeah, didn't he tell us that was going to happen?
Yeah.
I mean, Peter denied him 3 times that night, right? And the Lord told him of that too, right? So the thing about it is we've got to be hopefully at some point in tune enough to say, you know, you're right. You told me this was going to happen. And it's okay to be emotional. It's okay to go through those motions. But recognize for him to be the guy that he is. And he's going to extend that mercy to you. He's going to pull you through. You just need to, you know, lower our defenses down and let him be our guide. And it'll all work out.
That's good, Kyle. Is there anything else you'd want to talk about before we end?
No, well, likewise, I do admire you guys too. I especially loved your, you did a lesson on John, the Baptist.
Oh, yeah. Right.
I was like, huh? You hit that right on the head there, Jason.
Thanks.
You'll have to listen to that at some point if you haven't already. Anyway, John,
you.
He's got a great lesson on John. And then Allie,
You can call me.
can I call you Allie?
Yeah,
I'm
yeah.
sorry, Allison. I loved you had a talk about we need to talk more about Christ and gear our lives around him, and I just couldn't think anything better, you know. So, you know, we're there for each other. We're supposed to lift each other up, and we're supposed to be in this fight together, our hearts knit together as one. And that's why I love this idea of, you know, podcast, because you're talking about eternal things,
Yeah.
the things that matter the most. And we've got to be able to turn off the rest of the stuff as best we can. You know, turn to the Lord and, you know, things that matter the most, the things that are eternal in nature.
Well said. Well said. We've loved having you here. Thank you so much for coming. I have to give a shout out to your daughter, Sarah, who I know will be listening to this, because Sarah was one of my first seminary students several years ago now, which is weird to think about, but I knew that, and that was before we lived in this ward. So she didn't know me at all. Wow. I mean, I think she was somewhat familiar with the fact that I was a belle. I was married to Jason. Maybe. I don't even know.
Yeah, I don't know.
But yeah, she just was such a light in that class. I remember being very impressed with her even when she was just this young teenager. So anyway, Sarah, I love you. I see that the apple does not fall far from the tree here, talking to your dad. And of course, your mom is wonderful as well. But thank you so, so much. Thanks for thanks for supporting us. Thanks for listening to our podcast and for coming to be a part of it. You've greatly enriched it by being here. I think this is going to be probably a favorite episode for many people who are listening. For me, I'll be listening to this over and over again. So learned a lot. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kyle, and thank you to all who listened. And if anything at all resonated, which we hope certainly it did, please share this episode, share the podcast. We'd love more of Kyle's stories to get out there because it's so relevant to so many people. And so don't be shy about, sharing this and reaching out if you have feedback, or if you yourself have an amazing, or just a regular, whatever, just journey of faith that you would like to share, reach out to us and we'd love to get in contact with you. But anyway, thanks for your support. Thanks for listening. And thanks again to Kyle. It's been amazing chatting with you. And I feel like we barely even scratched the surface with how great he is. Yeah, we might have to do a part 2 sometime.
Be happy.
Thank you. So with that, we'll leave you, and we love you, and we'll talk to you next time. See ya.